And one. So we will be recording the session, and let's go. So my name is Navkaran Singh. You can call me Nav. I'm an intercultural management consultant with Hofstadter Insights. So I have over 8 years of experience in setting up and executing business and cultural transformation projects across Europe, the US, and India. Currently, I'm dialing in from India, and my role and my job makes me spend my time between India and UK mostly. And I'm joined here by my colleague, Philip.
Hello, everybody. So I've now, I'm sure, more than 20 years in organizational management with a specific background also in information management and managing IT departments, IT systems, IT teams. I'm a certified professional Scrum product owner, and I've been involved in Scrum already since the year 2007 in various capacities. And this is also why we have combined both our experience together, Nav and me, in talking about Scrum and culture.
Thanks, Philip. So for the next about 55 minutes, we're going to take you through a case study to take us back into a Scrum meeting. Then we're going to spend some time re-looking at Scrum, especially from the values point of view. We'll spend 15 minutes on talking about culture and how culture plays a role when it comes to Scrum adoptions. Then we'll go back to the case study to see if what we discussed gives us an ideas and solutions that we faced during the case study. We'll spend some time in letting you know where you can find more information on this. And then, as I promised, we will have a few minutes at the back. We will answer all your questions in the chat and let you ask more questions. So let's start with the case study. Philip?
Yes, so this case study comes from direct experience. In fact, I use my experience to build the following case study. Note that it is very much resembling certain situations that I've been in. But I can tell you, you will not find me within this case study. I have changed it so that it fits this particular explanation well. And I will introduce the situation right here. So we are currently in a retrospective. If you are familiar with the Scrum process, then you know what a retrospective is. We will get back to how the retrospective fits into the process in a moment. But in essence, it's a meeting. And it is a meeting where people are supposed to speak freely. It's very important. We have a product owner. We call him Case. It's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek joke because Case is very good for this case study. And Case knows everything about the business. That is important. The product owner has to be able to translate what the business needs into certain requirements so that these requirements can be built. So whatever we need for a system, a solution, we need some developers to build the solution that the business, that can help the business. So we have Peter, who is a developer. He is Dutch. He's sitting here at the table. He enters the room into the retrospective meeting. Dilip enters the room. He's an Indian, also a developer. We have Kavita, also a developer. We have Abdel, also a developer, also Indian, by the way, just like Kavita. I do know that there is a lot of difference between north and south of India, but for the sake of arguments, we say Indian. Because as you can see, there are a couple of people from India in the room, a couple of Dutch people in the room. The last person here on this list is Jan. He is the Scrum Master. A Scrum Master facilitates the process. It's very important, specifically now that Scrum is introduced to many companies all over the world, that Scrum Masters help to explain to people what Scrum is about and how to guide the process and to improve the situation. Note that I put Jan here at the bottom of the list because from a Dutch perspective, I see Scrum Masters as people who are facilitating the process. So the real work is done by the developers, of course. So you will understand that when you are a Scrum Master and you are supposed to facilitate, what you do is to make sure that the developers can do their work. And if it can be done better, great, then we find ways to improve. The Scrum Master does not lead. The word master may say something, may have some connotation about leadership here, But that is actually not the case in terms of the way Scrum was intended. And the funny thing was, when Nav and I built this case, we were talking about how to order these people. And the suggestion was to put Jan at the top of the list, or maybe as number 2. But interestingly, that was basically looking at it from an Indian perspective, where hierarchy and place and position are very important. And in Scrum, that is actually not important. What is important is that we are here for the business and that we do our best. And we will talk more about that when we will talk about these Scrum values. So this is the case. Now, the situation is as follows. Jan observes this retrospective meeting and notices something. During the meeting, and not only this meeting, it has happened in other meetings as well, Jan notices, and for this particular case, you can look at it through his eyes, that there are certain people speaking and there are certain people who are almost not speaking, or maybe not even speaking at all. He actually noticed that it is mostly the product owner and the older developer, Peter, who are speaking most, who are coming up with new ideas, coming up with issues, coming up with anything that can be improved. The retrospective meeting is basically about what went well and what could have gone better. Most of the time is spent by Kees and Peter coming up with ideas where they say, well, actually this didn't go well, this could have done better, actually this did go well, so we should celebrate this. Not a lot of input comes from the other people in the room, and Jan notices this and finds this not correct, because in a meeting like this, a retrospective, everybody should be able to deliver ideas, deliver input, show how the last sprint, as it is called, has been from their experience, so that we as a team, we as a group, can figure out how we can improve our process and do better next sprint, and again and again and again, and make sure that we have continuous improvement going on. Jan is a Scrum Master, so it's good that he notices this. And what is very important in this meeting, as I said already, is he should speak up. He should actually make a point out of this and say, I noticed this. I have noticed this difference in speaking time. And I think that that is something that we should work on, because everybody should have sufficient speaking time. Now, I would like to ask you to think about the situation and think if you have been in certain situations where you have noticed the same things or a similar thing, where you see that people are working somewhere from multiple nationalities and you notice discrepancies that you wouldn't have expected from, let's say, an organization or a group of people that are all from the same, let's say, your nationality. So we're going to, I'm going to leave that to your thoughts. And Nav has now opened a poll. And I'm going to ask you, we're going to ask you if you could answer the following question. Do national cultural differences play a role in this case study, in your opinion, from your experience? And what do you think?
A few more to go.
So it becomes evident that most people do think so, and if it didn't, we wouldn't have brought it up. So it's good that you think about this and notice that there must be some cultural difference at play here. Nav, over to you.
Yes, so as you can see in the poll results, I think we can close the session already. Everyone knows this already. 96% people said they do feel that national cultures play a role in this case study. Right, so that's a good start. We will see in the rest of the session how and how deep we need to go into the cultural differences to see what role was played. So I'm going to stop sharing the results now. And first we're going to go through the basics of Scrums. So we revisit that and Phil will take you through that, and then we'll come back to the culture.
Yeah. Philip. So what was Scrum about again? So Scrum is an idea that was launched in the 1980s, and it's basically a philosophy. It has become a methodology by now, but it's basically a philosophy. It's a new way of thinking. It's a new way of working. It comes out of the agile principles where we say that it is important that we focus on what is important, we focus on what needs to be delivered, much more than we focus on the processes. We focus much more on the people, much more on the systems. Now, Scrum is, like I said, a methodology. It's been put down in a lot of detail by certain people, and two specific people that need to be mentioned here are Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland, who came up with the Scrum Guide. If you ever navigate to scrum.org, you will notice that one of the resources to be downloaded there is a Scrum Guide, and this is really the basis of anything you need to know about Scrum. It's not big. It just tells you basically a couple of concepts. And let me see, I'm taking over the screen now. What it doesn't tell you is how to play rugby. Scrum is actually a term coming from rugby. It's a concept. It's a way of thinking about it. Rugby goes in terms of scrums, and what you do is you have an end zone, but you get there by going in short sprints. This is also a term that comes back into the Scrum Guide. We call those sprints. And what we are saying is we may have a big thing to do. Actually, in terms of any complex environment, it is probably an endless thing that we are doing. We are building and then maintaining a system where we're doing this in shorter sprints to make sure that we can control it. That is very important. We control the process. So we do this with a couple of concepts like the sprint, which can take 2 to 4 weeks. We do this with the planning meeting that starts the sprint. We do it with retrospective meeting that ends the sprint. But we also do it by thinking about why we do Scrum. The why is very important. And that comes down to understanding that there are 5 very important values at play when we introduce Scrum to any organization. So, like I said, the Scrum Guide is very thin. It doesn't tell you on a day-to-day basis what you should do at any given time. It does tell you that there are a couple of things, a couple of ground rules that we want to adhere by, and one of them is that we adhere to the 5 values. Now, in the Scrum Guide, you will notice that these values are mentioned, but they are not explained. So we have to ask ourselves, when we look at those values, do we look at those values in the same way? And I can give you one small heads up, we don't. In today's webinar, we will specifically look at one such situation. We've already seen the case study where we said we are in a retrospective meeting. We will not look at the entire process. We will just look at this one situation only. The retrospective meeting you can see here in the typical picture that represents the Scrum sprints from the planning to the retrospective meeting. We will today look specifically at the roles that are at play, the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the developers, and how they interact with each other, and how this can actually be looked at differently if you are coming from a different culture. So that's why we took the retrospective, because it's a very interesting case that explains to us what these values mean. We will take one of those values out. So if there is culture at play, we do need to understand what culture is about. And I'm going to leave that to Nav.
Thanks, Philip. So now you saw a little bit about Scrum. Let's now look at if culture plays a role at all in the case study, or when we look at Scrum values from different nationalities or different cultures. But before we go into culture, I want to play a little game with you. If your first name starts with the letter A to M, right? So you should remember your first name. And if it starts with letter A to M, now I'm asking you to close your eyes. So you're not allowed to look at the screen until I say so. So please close your eyes if if your first name starts with letter A to M. Now. Okay, you can open your eyes. And everyone else who had their eyes open, and hopefully your first name starts with the letter N to Z or Z, close your eyes now, and I will let you know when to open. Now, close your eyes. Okay, you may open your eyes now. And your task is very simple. All I want you to do is look at the next picture on the screen and just tell us what you saw. And I'm going to open a poll, so you will get a couple of options. And take a pick. Just give me a second. And you should have a poll on your screen now. So what did you see on the last screen? Okay, a few more. 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. We got 79% votes, so that's enough. So, we have a split vote. So 52% of you said you saw a man, and 48%, so half of you saw a mouse. So what happened? How come you look at the same picture and you see 2 different things? So let's go into that now. So what I did in this exercise is I asked you to look at this in the end. But what you don't probably realize is that for the people's A to M group looked at the left picture, so face of a man, and group 2 with N to Z, they looked at a mouse. So I basically programmed your minds to see what I want you to see, yeah? And this is how culture plays a role. So the environment and the society where you grow up, that society unintentionally program your minds to look at the world through that program. And that is what culture is. So it is, we fall into our own program, so we see the world through that cultural lens. And this is what culture is. This is the definition we use in Hofstede Insights. So culture is the collective programming of the mind by which one group distinguishes itself from another. So this definition was put together by Professor Dr. Geert Hofstede. So he's the forefather for comparative cultural studies, and it's his model that we use to look at different national cultures around the world. So remember, culture is the collective programming of the mind. And when we take this program, and when we take this group on countries level, we call it the national culture. So you will have company cultures when we talk about companies, but here what we're talking about today is the national cultures. So all these boundaries that you see around here, people inside those boundaries have these unwritten, unspoken rules, which you know by heart when you grow up in these countries. And we're going to look at one of these cultural values, which is called power distance. So how do different countries and different cultures around the world agree and accept that power should be distributed in that society? So if the power is distributed among most of the people equally, we call them equal or egalitarian societies. And if the power gap is more, we call them hierarchical. And then we have, of course, the people in between. So from our model, the world as it is today, it looks a little bit like this. So all the purples are societies which prefer egalitarian behaviors. So no one is better than others. No one is above others. Everyone has the same power, irrespective of your role. You go into green zones, then from purple side, the green zones already start looking hierarchical. And then you go to the orange countries. These are high power distance cultures. So very hierarchical. And if you look from the purple side, then the purples, sorry, look from the orange side, the purples look very flat, yeah? And this, what you see on the screen is research-based data, which is what our whole model is based on. So if we take these behaviors from the society into the corporate world, what does it mean? So how does it look? So we take power distance into an office or a corporate world in an egalitarian society or a hierarchical society. What implications and behaviors we see? Decision-making. So in egalitarian societies, yeah, so you saw the purples, Anglo-Saxons, the Scandinavians, the Dutch, the Germans. Decision-making in those companies, in those cultures, is decentralized. And it's a group-based decision. So group is discussed and the group makes a decision in most of the cases. And remember, culture is a relative. So this looks like this when you look from the hierarchical side. So for all the people who grew up in hierarchical culture, when they look at the decision-making in egalitarian, they see decentralized group decision-making. They see the manager's role is to support and support only. So managers get involved if there is a need and if they're asked to. Otherwise, they take a back seat. Communication is direct and open, irrespective of the hierarchy. It doesn't matter if you are the boss or the subordinate. The communication is two ways and it's open. You speak your mind. Taking initiatives in these cultures is encouraged. You, as a Scrum team member, are expected to solve your own problems. Come up with ideas if you have a problem. Don't come to the managers as the first option. And the control, especially by the managers or higher up in the hierarchy, is disliked by the others. So we want to have less control by managers or other ones who have a higher role in the hierarchy. And if you go to the hierarchical side, high power distance cultures like India, China, Russia, in Europe you have France, Belgium, or South America. These cultures, Middle East, decision-making is centralized. You have few people who are power holders and they make the decision on behalf of everyone and everyone follows that decision. Managers are there to lead and direct their teams. Yeah, the team, they're expecting the managers to make a lot of decisions and tell them what to do on a regular basis. Communication is indirect, it's one way mostly. So it's led by the one in power. So in a manager subordinate role, communication is mostly led by the manager. Initiatives are sanctioned. We don't want in hierarchical culture for people to try their own ideas without talking to someone who will make the decision. So the managers or power holders needs to be consulted before you make any initiatives on your own. The control is actually expected. In hierarchical side like India, for example, it is very motivating for teams or subordinates. So the manager is coming a few times a day and checking upon them saying, how's everything going? Do you need any support? Is everything on target? This is motivating for resources in hierarchical cultures, which will be disliked by the egalitarians. So when you see the corporate worlds, this is how it's split. And of course, the one in the green, in the middle, the greens are egalitarian for the oranges, but the greens are hierarchical for the egalitarians, yeah? So culture is always relative. So it depends which two cultures you're talking about. So if we go take these behaviors and we take resources from these cultures and we could put together a Scrum team. From egalitarian cultures, we see this. Most of the people feel that product owner, Scrum Master, and the developer are exactly the same. Egalitarian society, everyday business. You go to the hierarchical cultures, the developers may feel that Scrum Masters are higher up in the hierarchy, who may feel that the product owner is the top guy. And one thing that you normally don't realize, especially from egalitarian society, is that the line manager of the developer is never out of the picture. So line manager is overall responsible for leading and directing the developer. So even if he's not part of the Scrum team, he's always in the pictures. So this is how the Scrum team looks in the minds when you look at the hierarchical cultures and hierarchical countries like India. And if you look on the left, it's more flat. Yeah. So if we take that back, so if we look at these two countries and then we bring the values back, Scrum values back, let's see how those values are now looked and seen and interpreted by these two different cultures. So Philip, back to you.
Yeah, so earlier I explained that when you apply Scrum, one of the things you need to take into account as per the Scrum guide is that we need to work from these 5 values. And these values are courage, focus, commitment, respect, and openness. Now we have hinted at something already, and you will now get a better, you will now already have received a better idea that these values are not interpreted in the same way. And we have taken for this particular webinar the value of respect to have a closer look. So you can see already from the previous slide that when you're working in a more hierarchical society, it is important to realize that people look at respect in a different way, and this is based on power distance in this particular case. And it's the same for the other values. You have to think about that as well. So applying Scrum cannot be done in the same way in every country. So to take you a little bit back, in the 1960s, when Professor Hofstede at that time was becoming a doctor in his research with IBM, he introduced the idea that what was then a rather relative new concept of management, organizational management, or the management philosophy of how to lead an organization with managers and employees, could not be applied in the same way in every country. And the American leaders who were told this said, actually, that is nonsense. This is just a very new concept. It has been scientifically researched, and it is good. It has been validated. So it should be possible to implement this. It's just a matter of understanding it. However, during his research, it was found that clearly, because people coming from different countries truly have a different look at certain values, for instance, power distance, they could now start to realize that the way the Americans look at management was not the same way that people across the world looked at either management or how to lead a company, how to lead an organization, right? So if we now look at Scrum values and note that this comes very close to national cultural values, then it is interesting to see this difference. So what is respect in an egalitarian society? Well, in an egalitarian society, respect is a little downplayed. I'm a Dutch person myself. What I would never like is for somebody to overly compliment me on what I have done. I start to get annoyed, irritated. There's something wrong because there is too much, right? So what is important in an egalitarian society like the Dutch society is that people are open and direct. So if you tell me you did this well, you did this wrong, then I think, okay, I got some balanced feedback that is good for me. However, I think that in the same way that a CEO in the Netherlands would think of the same thing. So it could be possible that I actually contact the CEO of an organization and mention something. And maybe I do this in a diplomatic way. Maybe I say, well, I noticed this, and maybe this could be better, and the CEO might actually accept my feedback. Now, this might be looked at strangely when you're coming from a hierarchical organization where if it isn't requested, then you shouldn't actually directly contact the CEO because this person is in a much higher position, this person is busy, this person has valuable time. So what is important in a hierarchical society is that you do show proper respect. That, for instance, you do not walk into the CEO's office and say, I have an idea. You just don't do that. And that is a matter of respect as looked from the perspective of societies where power distance is higher. When we talk about respect, again, from the Dutch perspective or the American perspective, by the way, in the UK, it's the same thing. Respect comes from doing well. So basically what you're showing is that you are good at something and you get respect because of what you did, right? So people work in a team with you and over time they build respect for you because they can see that you are working hard, that you're delivering results, that you have good ideas, etc., etc. So your expertise is respected. In a more hierarchical society, it is important that the relationships are respected. So if somebody has worked years to become a high manager in a certain organization, you should respect that. And again, that is done by, for instance, not just walking into this office and saying, hey, I have an idea, but imagine that power distance also comes from age and seniority. So imagine that you have a grandfather or maybe even a great grandfather. In a hierarchical society, you will respect age because of the wisdom that comes with age. So this person needs to be treated well, this person needs to, for instance, be allowed to enter the room first and sit at the head of the table. And that is simple because, like I said, age brings wisdom, and that wisdom can be very useful for the people who are younger to learn from. And that is the way we look at respect and hierarchy in a hierarchical society. So when we read in the Scrum Guide that we need to employ the value of respect, we also have to realize that it means something different in, on the one hand, a culture like the US, UK, Netherlands, Sweden as well. And on the other hand, cultures from where people are from nationalities like India, Japan, Middle East was mentioned, France, etc. So now we go back to the case and we ask ourselves as a Scrum Master, what does this mean? Does this mean that people look at the situation differently? And the answer is yes, of course. And we now know why that is. We've asked you in the previous poll, do you think that culture is something that influences how people behave and what people do? Definitely. And we know this because the people that we're talking about are from different countries, and they will probably look at respect or, we will stick to respect, of course, respect differently. Note, by the way, that nobody's the same. So we cannot say that Dilip, Kavita, Abdel on the right-hand side are very hierarchical. We don't know that. What we do know is that they are Indian, so it might be that because of their upbringing, they look at the world differently, because we know, statistically speaking, that a lot of people from India value hierarchy much more than they do in the Netherlands, right? So please do not make the mistake of looking at this from a person-to-person perspective. This is a statistical situation. But the fact is that Jan has already mentioned, that Jan has already observed that the people on the left are a lot more talkative in the meetings, not only the retrospective meeting that we took in the case, but the other meetings as well, and also on the floor, than Dilip, Kavita, and Adel that we have here on the right-hand side. Could that be because they are from a different society? Well, that's certain. And we have, oh, by the way, like I said before, this is because I've been in the same situation, right? I was not the Scrum Master in this case, but we did notice this, this issue. I am Dutch, so I was very talkative in those meetings. And when the Scrum Master mentioned this difference, we all said, well, yeah, that is true. And we have to come up with some ideas on how to deal with this, right? So we go back to the retrospective meeting. And as we have said, Jan, the Scrum Master, and I would like to ask you again to look at this from the eyes of Jan, notices this difference and brings it to the table, because like we said before, openness is a very important value in Scrum, so you have to mention it. It could mean nothing, it could mean anything, just bring it to the table and everybody will say, interesting point, let's have a look at this. Transparency in that sense is a very important pillar in Scrum. So we have to each lay out on the table, what is the situation, what can we do with this? And Jan here takes the floor. Based on what we now know about these Scrum values on the one hand, and the national cultural values on the other, Jan brings to the floor a couple of ideas, and these are some actual ideas that, that we came up with together at the time, that were applied, and that really did create a success for the team. It really created team growth, and that is very important in Scrum, right? So this team is supposed to work as an independent team and come up with their own solutions to their own situations. And the one situation is the one we are presenting right here. So number one, the first point of advice that Jan comes up with is what we can do is we can tell the Dutch explicitly, because that's how the Dutch work, to be less prevalent, less talkative. They will actually appreciate the direct feedback. The Dutch are more about direct communication. So when you say something specifically, then people will understand it well enough and say, well, maybe it was harsh, maybe it was difficult to accept, maybe they will have to think about it, but they will appreciate the fact that indeed we have seen that there is a difference in speaking time. So we should do something with that. And in the particular case I'm talking about, we did take this into account and said, let's make sure we respond a little bit slower, We give more time to other people to talk, because we are not the only ones who have good ideas. So when you think you have a good idea, great. Just don't flood the retrospective, because everybody should be able to come up with their own issues or ideas in a retrospective meeting. Sorry, what I did not mention before, remember the Scrum cycle that we saw a moment ago. So the retrospective meeting was at the end. So it is exactly like what it says. It is looking back at the process of the last 2 weeks. So Jan says, well, over the last 2 weeks, I have noticed this difference in speaking time, and I would like to suggest that the Dutch think about this every time they're at a meeting and try to give other people more time to come up with their ideas or their answers to questions. That was one improvement that we talked about. The other is rotating chairmanship. It was a very good result, actually, because when we started to assign chairmanship on a rotation basis, everybody got to be a chairperson. That means that everybody is equally important in the room, because everybody should be able to chair, and everybody gets the experience of chairing a meeting like this. And it was difficult sometimes for some people in the room, because discussions would start, people would go, yes, but sometimes it was a difficult topic on the table, and people would say, no, it's not because of this, no, not because of that. As a chairperson, you still have to make sure that we don't overrun the meeting. And the more experience you get with that, whether you are a product owner, whether you are old and experienced, or let's say have been working in Scrum for a long time, or you're young and inexperienced, or maybe you're still young and you still have a lot of Scrum experience, for everybody involved, it was great experience, and we could see people grow in their role. It was a great thing to see. Another piece of advice was to foster creativity. We have to make sure that people realize that they're in a warm environment, a protective environment, that whenever they have an idea, they can launch that idea. Whenever somebody brings an idea to the table or brings it to a person specifically, there should always be a possibility to openly discuss that idea and look at the merits. Once that protective environment was there and was known, everybody was able to come up with ideas at any time, bring it to the table. Sometimes it was picked up, sometimes it wasn't, but people felt that everybody's ideas mattered, and it actually created a very strong team. People felt very appreciated in the team, people felt very loyal to the team even. Question asking. One very simple piece of advice that we came up with was to say, well, as a chair, make sure that when something is brought to the table and people need to respond, make sure that the question is asked to everybody on a rotation basis, so that everybody gets a chance to give an answer to that question. Maybe, how do you feel this went? Or do you have an idea for improvement for the next cycle? And by doing that, we were making sure that even the people who were more comfortable, maybe in the beginning or possibly because of their background, to sit back and listen and only chip in when directly asked. Everybody actually noticed that it was good to be asked a question directly and to, of course, be able to answer that question. And then all the answers came to the table, and people could evaluate what to do with whatever situation came to the agenda. One point to stress, and this works for the Dutch, and I'm pretty sure it works for the Brits and the Americans, and there will be some others as well. Note that everything is a good idea. And one thing that will always kill any conversation is the word but. So the moment somebody, let's say one of the junior developers, says, I think that this is the case, I think that we could have a look at, let's say, how we implement user stories or how we write user stories, there will be Dutch people who go, yes, but. Now, they have to learn that but is killing the discussion, basically. So the moment you think that you're going to put in a yes, but, you'd better reconsider and think, okay, well, maybe there is merit in at least looking at this idea, and maybe you have a misgiving, or maybe you have some additional things to add to that particular point, but make sure that your first reaction is not yes, but, because it will immediately kill that idea, sad as it is. Yeah. So we really had to learn a new way of working, and really had to rewire ourselves to make sure that the moment you think yes, but, you go, no, wait, I will wait with my answer and first hear the idea out. Lastly, what is very important is that this is not all about the Dutch. And look at the fact that I am Dutch. I look at this from a Dutch perspective a lot, and I think that from the Dutch side we could improve a lot. But we also have to take into account that when we work with Indians, we don't unlearn our culture. So we really have to take into account the hierarchical way of working. There is no need to change that. In fact, it is even impossible. So what we should also be aware is that there is a line manager. This person is not in the room. This person is not going to add anything to the discussion here, but this person is still there. This person has very important responsibilities, and the people who are in the room do have a relationship with this line manager. So one good piece of advice was to delegate authority and to have the line manager explicitly explain to the people that they're leading how important it is that they add their ideas to the mix, that they add their insights to the mix. Because if you're a developer, if you know everything about programming or testing or the database or the IT system, then your expertise is very valuable, because you look at things from your perspective and your expertise, and you might see something that other people might not. So the line manager could very explicitly delegate the authority to, for instance, bring insights to the table without having to check the line manager first, right? And the moment they started, over time, it grew to a situation where, with that protective environment, people could say, well, I think we might have an issue in the future with this because the coding is not done correctly, or we get inputs that is misunderstood, that is not very much understood. And the people in the room had to do something with that. And of course, by doing so, they improved the process and they improved the team. And they even improved the the team feeling. Right. So those were the ideas that came to the table. Like I said, these ideas were implemented, and it really did enhance the way of working, the results, the effectiveness of the team. And it was partly based on understanding that there is a difference in the way people look at culture. And the moment we started to understand, let's say me again from a Dutch perspective, that there is another way of looking at, for instance, respect, then we started to learn how to actually apply this knowledge in such a way that we could indeed change the situation, improve the situation. And it was great to see, actually. It was great to be there and notice this difference. Now, if you will take the next slide, please.
Yeah, thanks, Philip. So what we basically saw in the last 45 minutes is that the national culture values do play a role in how Scrums are adopted, Scrum process is implemented across different cultures. And of course, we only touched the tip of the iceberg. We only showed you one of the values in the national culture, which is hierarchy or power distance. And we took one of the values from Scrum, which is respect. And when we put these two together, in this case, in Netherlands and India, what we saw is 5 new working practices, which may not be obvious if you implement Scrum with your current understanding. So in this case, Dutch probably would have implemented it without having those working practices in place. Or they may put it after making a lot of mistakes, and then they realize maybe they do that. But what we suggest and encourage is that all the countries varies on this national culture values, not only on hierarchy, but there are 5 other dimensions. There are 5 other values, which you see on the screen. So in Hofstede Insights, we have the 60 model, which have scores for most of the countries that you will ever work with on 6 different values. And when we take these 6 different value scores of, let's say, 2 cultures working together in a Scrum team, and we take the Scrum values or the current Scrum working practices in that team. So we will look at courage, focus, commitment, respect, openness. how are these values being implemented? For example, in our case study, we need to take into account the country values of the different Scrum team members, because they have a big impact on how the Scrum values or even the Scrum working practices are understood. So what me and Philip have been working on is to make use of both these sides. Take a current Scrum adoptions or a plan that you will be doing in the future, put it through the 60 model, so we know the background of each team member. We put it through the planned Scrum practices in your team, and then we come out with what we call it culturally sensitive Scrum working practices. So what you saw on the last sheet that Philip showed you, those were 5 new working practices that may not be obvious to all Scrum teams when they're working between egalitarian and hierarchical team members. And what we do is we look at all the 6 dimensions on both sides, 5 from Scrum and 6 from the countries. And then we put your project through that, not project, your Scrum process through that and the Scrum team. And then we bring out new working practices then that bypasses these values. So basically what you get in the end is that the Dutch remain Dutch with their values, Indians remain Indians with their values. We're not asking them to change. We're asking them to do these new values which take into account, we ask them to do these new working practices which take into account their current country values, so they don't feel uncomfortable at all. So in this case, we did the same. So in the end, we follow this new Scrum working practice in addition to the setup Scrum working practices to reduce the impact of different national cultures that come out during Scrum adoptions. And you might be thinking now, so where do I find more? So what we are going to do next after this webinar is share an email with you, plus also people who are not on the webinar today, the full program information. So in the program information, you can find how do we do that and how long is the program. We will also ask you to give us some feedback, especially for this webinar, what you liked, what you did not like, what we can improve for the next session. And in addition, we are giving you 1 hour free consultation. So you can set up a call with me and Philip in the coming weeks to discuss your own Scrum adoptions, your own Scrum issues, and we'll be happy to guide you through our process, and we'll see if we can support your Scrum adoptions. In addition, you can also find similar information, what we already shared, and other information on Philip's website, which is multigrade.nl, and my personal website, napran.com. And you can also go to hofsteadinsights.com if you want to learn about the 6D model. So the 6D model values are open source, so you can actually go and have a look yourself, and you can compare your own countries to see what sort of flavors you get from the country that you might be already working with. And in addition, now that you allowed us to record the session, we will also be putting this recording of today's session on Philip and my website. So if you want to revisit this session again or want to share with others, feel free to do so. Just give us a few days to upload this video onto our website. So that was all we had to discuss and share from our side. And if you guys have any questions, do not hesitate to contact myself or Philip in the coming future or even long-term future. You have our emails. You will be getting an email from us anyway. And we will see where we can help you, and hopefully we can learn from each other. That's all for today. So thank you for your time. And I see we have 8 minutes to answer any burning questions that you might have. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing the screen so we might be able to see some faces. Okay. By the way, I see that in chat there are no questions, but I do insist that you open your mics and let us know if you have any doubts, any questions, any other information you would like from our side. Very quiet. Any questions? Either we did a great job or very bad job. It's one or the other.
Marty, can you fire it off? I'm sure you have an interesting question for us.
Philip, kind of you to put your faith in me, but you have done such a great job. I don't have any questions, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, we got some feedback already in the chat as well. So we're happy that you found this useful. And of course, there's a lot more to come. So we just wanted to give you a flavor of how it actually works in real life.
Jan, I'm happy to see you.
Yeah, I'm glad I could make it.
Yeah, me too. Hope you liked it.
Yeah, definitely. It's well, it's something to think about. Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And,
I happen to know that Jan works in an organization also where they have employed people from India.
yeah, it's actually an Indian organization, so I'm
That's right.
the alien in this organization.
Yeah, I'm saying it wrong. Yeah, it's an Indian organization that has employed Dutch. Yeah, that's correct.
Yes.
Very nice.
Any questions about values, cultural, national cultural values, or Scrum values? Hmm?
What about other project management methodologies apart from Scrum? Yeah, good question, Jose. So yes, of course, other project management, so PMP or Prince, they are also very cultural sensitive. Of course, when you look at those processes, if you talk about Prince, having a project management appeals to hierarchical cultures like India, because the project manager can take the decision, and he has been given a power by the line managers. But yes, from my experience, and we have Peter on the call, we did a lot of transformation projects with Western Europe and India, and we were using standard project management methodologies, and we still faced a lot of these issues, and we did have to adapt our projects, and actually we ended up running a lot of cultural awareness sessions for both sides to understand this unspoken, unwritten rules of the game.
Yeah, this also applies to non-project management methods like the agile methods. For example, Kanban is a very nice example. Kanban is, as you can hear by the name, possibly a Japanese concept. And you can see it from the concept and the way it's been construed itself. It comes very much out of starting with a couple of keywords that mean a lot in themselves, and that ask people to interpret them. What it doesn't do is prescribe how people work, where, for instance, in a more British project management methodology like Prince 2, it does prescribe how people work. Prince 2 is a lot less about the concepts, the abstract concepts, and much more about a specific process. But Kanban, again, is the complete opposite. So knowing that and understanding why it works like that can help you to introduce Kanban to a non-Japanese society, like, again, for instance, an organization in America, for instance.
Thanks. Peter, did you want to add something? I think we have a couple of questions on the chat. But
yeah, maybe one thing I like to add is we are talking about Western Europe working with India. In fact, it's a bit more complex than that. Maybe not for the meeting today, but working between UK and Germany or Netherlands and Belgium feels sometimes as complex as working between Western Europe and India. So even if let's say the differences are not so extreme, or when there are other dimensions, then only the power distance are involved. The same message applies, right?
Yeah.
The way of working in a project management is very cultural sensitive.
yeah. Exactly.
And maybe that's also the case, like you said, Philip, between Northern and Southern India. Even that.
Right.
Right?
Good one. Yeah.
And sometimes we say India and China is the same, but if you're in a project between China and India, then there are also many cultural issues.
Strong differences. Yeah, yeah, understood. So
we
the
have
cultural
a couple
model
of-
itself. Yeah,
Sorry,
go ahead.
No, we have a couple more questions in the chat, so we'll come back to that.
Let's go there.
Gunther, you asked, how do you think it is a good idea that a person from another culture becomes a manager directly, or should start with a role lower in the hierarchy to learn the culture first? Well, it depends on which two cultures you're talking about. Like I said, it's relative. So you will, so especially if you talk about power distance in this case, when you do move managers from a low power distance to high power distance or other way around, they will feel the cultural differences, and a lot of the time they are negative rather than positive. So I do know that in Ericsson, where I worked before, we had some new managers who moved from India, and then they had to manage the team in the UK. And they struggled with the role because they were expecting the UK subordinates to follow whatever I'm telling you. And the British subordinates were saying, well, you don't tell me what to do. We sit down, we discuss, and then if we agree, then we can go ahead. So that was a pain, and they had to learn the hard way that it's not my way or the highway, but it's more consultative approach. It's an egalitarian society. So Gunther, to answer your question, yes, it does matter, and it depends on which culture you're talking about. So it's always relative. If you're talking about Dutch and Indians, yes, we will have to take care of making both sides aware when it comes to how to manage your teams effectively. I hope that answered your question. Yoko had question, in an egalitarian culture, who would be the owner or the person responsive to roll the Scrum well? How would that person get assigned such a role? Philip, I'll let you answer that, being a Scrum specialist. We don't hear you, Philip. Okay, I think Philip is having microphone problems. No, we don't hear you. Okay, so let me answer that for you, Marseille. So as such, the ownership is not with the person in egalitarian society. The idea is the ownership is with the Scrum team. Yeah, so together as a team, we are the owners of delivering the sprints. Yeah, because to an egalitarian mind, it doesn't come in the head or in the gut that one is above the other, or the product owner or the Scrum Master needs to drive this, but we all need to drive this together. Yeah, so that's the whole idea of the sprint, Scrum. We go together in short sprints to deliver this. So the ownership role is not as important or as crucial in egalitarians. We don't need to assign an owner, it's the team itself. But in hierarchical culture, that may be the case. So you need to make sure that high hierarchy Scrum developers don't feel that it's the Scrum Master or the product owner who are the owner of the delivery, but we are together. So that's the cultural difference that we need to manage when it comes to these two. Okay.
Thank you, Nav. That was very clear.
Thank you. And Philip also, I think, yeah, he agrees. I'm looking at time, so unfortunately we're out of time, but I would like to thank you very much for taking an hour out of your busy schedules. We will be sharing some follow-up information in an email, and we will be sharing this recording with you so you can spread it further. And of course, like we said, if you have any questions that comes to your mind afterwards, feel free to get in touch with myself and Philip, and we'll take a discussion directly. So for now, thank you very much. You're free to dial off.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
You guys.